Spain is different, says a famous advertising campaign that sought to attract visitors from all over the world to the land of flamenco, bullfights, medieval architecture, and of course, delicious food. Spain is today the 14th largest economy in the world with a nominal GDP of $1,398 billion and the 6th largest in Europe. The GDP per capita is $29,961, which gives even the average Spanish citizen a high standard of living. Spain is now one of the most visited countries in the world, offering a highly developed tourist infrastructure, beautiful natural landscapes, and of course, beaches. Tourism is the sector that contributes the most wealth to the Spanish economy, with a total annual income of 176 million euros, which represents 14.6% of GDP. The second largest industry in Spain is the automotive sector, which income represents 10% of GDP. These data can be seen when we look at the remarkable development of Spain. But has it always been that way? The truth is that a lot of water has flowed under the bridge, so that Spain left behind a dark past of war, death, and poverty, and became the society it is today. 2 years, 8 months, and 15 days of a bloody war conflict known as the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939 had an impact on an economic crisis that was even greater than that suffered by the rest of Europe after World War II. The expenses associated with the warfare involved completely depleting the gold reserves to acquire weapons. Only death and decades of a deep economic depression remained, which plunged Spain into misery. Franco's rise to power implied the consolidation of an extremely protectionist economy. In those days, Spain depended on multiple supplies brought from other countries, but the Franco regime imposed an economy that tried to be self-sufficient. The result was that the crisis worsened and the shortages increased. The faith that said the regime had in state intervention led to the implementation of a rigid rationing and price control program. These years are remembered as a period of famine. History teaches over and over that the equation, interventionism, scarcity, rationing, and price controls discourage the production of goods and services, creating a huge black market as a consequence. And so it happened. The monetization of the fiscal deficit in the early 1940s triggered an inflationary process, and the accumulation of debt generated almost unlimited liquidity for the banking system that laid the foundations for price growth in the 1950s. At the end of the decade, the United States began the famous Marshall Plan, intending to rebuild Europe and halt the advance of communism. But Spain was the only European country excluded, due to the consolidation of the Franco regime, sympathizing with fascism. After the evident failure of autarky, the Franco regime was forced to relax strong interventionist and control policies. It was a slow process. In 1953, Spain signed a cooperation agreement with the United States, which included a financing plan of $1,523 million. Price controls were left behind, and the supply of basic products improved. The inflow of foreign exchange into a depressed country would soon begin to show some positive results, although later, multiple financial imbalances showed up. This led to the start of the so-called Stabilization Plan of 1959. The Stabilization Plan consisted of austerity policies and openness to foreign investment. It is here when the so-called Spanish miracle occurs, a period of economic boom between 1959 and 1974. Annual GDP growth went up to 7%. GDP per capita began to grow indefinitely. Spain began a massive process of industrialization that made Spain a powerful country. leaving the previous situation as a dark past that should never return and that we can only remember. One of the industries that most evidenced this growth was the automotive sector, which in 10 years had already grown more than 20%. By the 1960s, Spain no longer had the 70,000 vehicles it had in the 1940s, but rather more than 1 million, and it was increasing dramatically. Tourism became massive, immigration increased, and the peasant exodus to the industrialized areas worsened. Spain became attractive, but at the same time, many regions within the country were abandoned and did not enjoy such development. Everything indicated that the miracle did not occur throughout the Spanish territory. The 1970s were ending, and the economic miracle began to lose its magic. On June 12, 1985, Spain formally joined the European Community. This historical event was a strong boost to the Spanish economy. Direct aid from the European Union, the increase in exchanges with other European countries, and the increase in capital inflows from the other members of the community were the pillars of a framework of economic growth that Spain experienced. The year when Spain began to be part of the community, the GDP was $164,250 million. 3 years later, GDP rose to $379,360 million. Foreign direct investments in Spain grew from 1.4% to 6.6% of GDP, and Spanish investment in other areas of the world increased from 0.2% to 9.6% of GDP. Starting in the 1990s, the shadow of the economic recession was knocking on the doors of the Spanish people again, bringing unemployment to a rate of 24% in 1993. GDP fell 1.03% that same year. Public debt grew to reach 68% of GDP. The official currency of the time, the peseta, was officially devalued by the Spanish government. A fiscal cut was officially decided to face a crisis represented by the failure of the pension system. From 1995 onwards, Spain once again experienced a stage of growth. Membership in the European Union comes at a price. The member states must commit to maintaining a certain fiscal discipline specified in the status of what is known as the Maastricht criteria, or Euro convergence criteria. After the official entry into the Economic and Monetary Union of the European Union, Spain made the circulation of the common European currency within its territory official, the euro. This implied a drop in interest rates. These conditions were ideal for the increase in international investment in Spain, attracted by the climate of prosperity and cheap credits. Unemployment fell to 8%. The new euro notes and coins flooded the Spanish market from large bank coffers to small corner stores, and immigration increased again. The real estate sector absorbed the signals and prices began to rise steadily. Spain became the 8th economy in the world for 2007, with a GDP of $1,472 billion. But under the carpet, a monster began to grow. The housing boom was fueled by mounting debt. Interest rates began to rise. The economy began to slow down. Nothing good awaits an economy that feeds on debt, and Spain would experience this firsthand with the 2008 economic crisis. The bubble burst, and various economic actors began to default. Initially, inflated home prices began to decline progressively. Unemployment went from being at its all-time lows to more than 20%. This crisis increased public debt, and in 2014, it represented 100% of the GDP. Then President José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero was forced to initiate an economic adjustment plan and cuts in fiscal spending. The need for an intensive and comprehensive bank bailout program was discussed. For 2012, the IMF declared that the needs of the Spanish banks exceeded 40 billion euros. The quality of life of the Spaniards was severely affected by that long economic crisis that resulted in unpayable debts, massive eviction, losses in wealth with the fall in real estate prices, the dizzying increase in unemployment, and bankruptcy for multiple companies. Starting in 2014, a progressive process of economic acceleration began again, after the effects of the various measures taken to face the severe economic recession suffered. No one suspected that 5 years later, a new global threat would appear that led governments to close borders, close the economy, impose lockdown, and increase spending in the health sector. The pandemic crisis in Spain in 2020 has led the economy to a new period of recession, which, according to European Union estimates, the Spanish economy could plummet to 10.9%, and unemployment will increase to 20% this year. A significant drop, considering that the main industries of Spain were forcibly paralyzed during the emergency measures: tourism, the airline, and the automotive sector. But this new crisis cannot even be compared to the dark past that Spain already faced. If you want to discuss the video, please let us know what you think about it in the comment section below. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next video.